So good afternoon, everybody. So as Matt has already alluded to, David Brin is our speaker later in the conference, and he's talking about what he calls the near-term future, which is the next 40 years. For us, I'm going to look at the next 5 years. And 5 years in the data center world is kind of tomorrow, really, because you build a data center, it's designed to last a lot longer than 5 years, I would hope. So what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about the environment that the data centers are going to be built in the next few years, about the innovation. Is there going to be sufficient demand? What is that race, if you like, between the progress of IT and the demand for data centers? Then I'm going to pick on what I think are 10 trends for data centers in the next 5 years. And then I'm just going to look at a few different data center types that I think will continue to be built or may be built that aren't being built today. And then we'll summarize where we go. And if we've got time, we'll have some Q&A. I'm aware that the near-term future for quite a lot of you is about half an hour's time when the bar opens. So I'm going to try and focus on making smooth but timely progress through this. So the interesting thing is we very often get asked about, could IT get ahead of demand and thereby cause a slowdown in data center construction? Or equally, could demand get so far ahead of the progress of IT that there is a massive shortage? Actually, on the whole, and over the last few decades, with a few little blips here and there, demand for IT has stayed ahead even of Moore's law and the capacity of IT to continually innovate. And this, of course, has been very healthy for the industry because it's enabled prices and margins to stay high, keep us all in business. We get the privilege of going inside the laboratories of Intel and HP and Cisco and all of these various companies, and we get to look at what the roadmap looks like going forward. And we can say with some pretty good level of certainty that the levels of performance improvement that we have seen for the past several decades are going to continue. So this is an environment where IT is going to continue to, the performance will continue to increase at a very steady rate and the rate of innovation. IT demand at the same time will, if anything, outpace it. Every single data point that we collect, and I put a few on the screen here, I probably could have filled 3 screens with this kind of thing. Every data point we collect shows that demand for IT is going to be very, very strong for as far as we can see. And I don't even think that these kind of figures fully take into account the things like mobile technology and all the data that's going to create, the Internet of Things, etc. So if there is disruption in the data center industry, it is not going to be caused by recession or capacity, a glut in capacity or anything like that. It's going to be internal. It's going to be different parts of the industry competing with others for a share of the market. So it's going to be, there is definitely some consolidation and some competitive battles to come, but it's going to be within a growing industry. Now, just a quick recap. Last year, we presented the 451 Disruptive Technologies in the Data Center project. We produced this report that is still very relevant and a good read if you get the opportunity to read it. But we assessed actually initially 30 technologies, and we honed it down to 10, and we gave our experts the opportunity to rate it. And if 5 is like very disruptive and immediately, and below 3 is not very disruptive at all. And I think we got it pretty well right, or our group of experts got it pretty well right. Some of the things that we identified last time, I think, are going to be quite significant. Advanced DCIM, cloud-level resiliency that I will come to in a short while. Flash storage, I think, was the highest, and we're certainly seeing that. What have I missed? Power proportional computing, I think, was also very significant. What we're actually doing at the moment is myself and my team, we've been going around speaking to a lot of people in the industry. It's less quantitative and more qualitative. We want to know what people think is going to happen based on the trends that are already in place today, based on what we know about the technologies. We want to know not which technologies might possibly disrupt, but which trends are already clearly underway and are very probably will happen. So here are the 10 areas that we've settled on in my team. And we're going to produce a report later in the year, and if people think that I've got the wrong 10, not too late, please come and talk to me. We just want to have a very persuasive report at the end. First thing we're seeing is there's a change going on in the way data centers are built. We are seeing a lot more prefab, a lot more modular, more use of reference designs. And then once you use these core reference designs, we're seeing much greater choice emerging around repeatable cores. So if you speak to any of the suppliers of prefabricated modular data centers, people like Schneider, Emerson, Blade Room, there's actually quite a long list. And my colleague Daniel Bezo is talking about it, I think at 11 o'clock tomorrow. All of those suppliers, well, let's say most of those suppliers have got a very strong pipeline. And that was not the case a year ago or 2 years ago. So there is a change going on. Now, this isn't just about prefab modular, this is just about repeatability. So, for example, Compass data centers that have their lean build, a repeatable model that they use over and over again. It's about industrialization of data centers. Recently, I went to the big new Equinix data center in London that's being built. And even though it's a traditional stick-built design, a very high proportion of it was manufactured off-site, it's prefabricated and brought on-site. So the idea that it's a big engineering project is gradually, I mean, it always will be with data centers in large data centers, but it's gradually being productized and industrialized. And I just want to show you some examples. All these data centers have gone up in the last couple of years, and they're all built, constructed, delivered, if you like, off-site. They are assembled on-site but manufactured off-site. So just in case there's any idea that, you know, I'm talking about containers, I most definitely am not. There's a huge range of data centers that can now be constructed in this way and are being, and we think that is the future. I don't need to tell any of you the disruption that the big guys, Amazon, Google, etc., are causing to the industry, or let's say that they potentially can cause. They are building very, very highly efficient data centers, and although we haven't yet put numbers around this, we think they're going to take a very significant share of what will be a significantly enhanced and enlarged data center market in 2020. And I think it's worth spending just a couple of minutes on some of the ways that they do this. They're really very focused and very rigorous in the way that they build. It's really quite scary, the focus they have and the competitiveness they have at these companies. They have a focus on really eliminating anything unnecessary, any unnecessary energy use, any unnecessary technology, even the contracts they have with customers, very, very simple. Of course, they innovate a lot, and huge amount of innovation. They've got a lot of people working on innovation teams, and I'll come to what Amazon's doing in a moment. And they're also quite brutal in the way that they leverage their power, in terms of the amount of tax they pay, how they negotiate discounts and concessions. They choose all their locations for the lowest possible energy prices. They strike very long-term deals at very low prices, and they have a step and repeat model in the way that they manufacture to keep the prices down. So they are going to be very, very competitive. And one thing I think you come away from this, if you're building a data center or you're running any kind of commercial data center, you don't want to compete against these guys on cost. Compete against them in some other way, but definitely not on cost. And I'll come to that in a moment. So just an example, we were briefed recently by Amazon on some of the things they're doing. And they're building, designing their own servers, they're designing their own storage, They're designing their own network equipment, even the network cards in the servers they design themselves. They have self-service software, automation software. It's quite incredible the amount that a company that's only, 15, 20 years old, if that, is so sophisticated now and is investing so heavily in being competitive. They're now talking about even designing some of their own chips, using ARM-type designs and laying fiber and building global networks. So, I mean, this is a very substantial operation. Just as an example of what this might mean in terms of competitiveness, if I run down the right-hand column, because of the way they buy their servers, they're probably getting them at half the price that many other people are paying. Because they get their IT utilization up high, they're getting a significant level of efficiency compared to rivals in the rest of the market. They refresh their kit very regularly, which means that they get the benefit of Moore's law and energy improvements. They have very low PUEs. They have low facility build costs, and of course they have very low financing costs. And financing costs are a very significant portion of the cost of building new data centers. And in their case, obviously, because they're usually so full of capital rich, they have low costs. The next thing, clearly, new data centers are going to have very low PUEs, and we're already seeing that. It's very rare to see a new data center of any kind being built with a P, or being designed with lower PUE than say 1.5, and it's not uncommon to go quite a long way below that. I'm sure that trend will continue. So 2020, we're going to be seeing about 1.2 and so on. But what I want to get to here really is I think we're starting to see a change in the treatment of energy in a more real-time sense. So for the first time, we're starting to see big data centers, even in the financial industry and so on, who are actually now selling their energy back to the grid. And you're definitely going to see this in certain economies, such as the UK, where they have an energy supply problem looming. You're going to see a lot more transactive energy. So anyone who has either the ability to turn down their energy consumption, which so far hasn't happened in IT, but I'm sure will happen. But more importantly, they have generators. We're going to see the supply of power back to the grid at a considerable profit opportunity. I was in a data center in Switzerland recently, and the utility could actually turn on the generator without the data center operators having any say over it whatsoever. Now, I don't think that is something that most people would feel very comfortable with, but certainly this particular data center operator had no problem with it whatsoever. There's also a need to turn down the power consumption of the IT, and power management, power capping, I think they've been taboo. They really are very rare in this industry at the moment, and I think I can confidently predict that as we move towards 2020, that will become normal practice, because it simply doesn't make sense to be powering up these servers and maintaining them at such a high level if they're not doing any useful work. And I just want to quickly show, one reason why I think power capping is particularly interesting. The electricity price tends to be highest, or certainly as we move towards dynamic pricing, will be highest when the load is highest, and that's a kind of double whammy. And as servers become more dynamic, so their power consumption follows that brown line more, the rest of the time the data center is operating substantially below capacity. So you build this entire data center, or let's say it's just a data hall, or maybe it's just part of a data center, but you build that, and then most of the time it's operating at a fraction of the power that it's provisioned to. I think the 2020 data center will evolve strategies for dealing with that. If it can take off the peaks by power capping or by load management, by moving to the cloud, something, it will enable data centers to be much more efficient. Cloud level resiliency. If some of you, I think we're in Eric Hanselman's session this morning, he was talking about this. This comes up all the time. Is software going to provide more resilience? Are we going to move towards lighter redundancy in terms of power and cooling, etc., and move the workloads up? Now, I happen to believe that because of the IT complexities, because you have to make changes to the databases, to the applications, you've got to have a great deal of confidence in the network, you probably need network independent, you need independent pathways. I think it's going to take a while, but I think this is a clear long-term trend, and I think this is going to be, let's say by 2020, that's going to be a very loud conversation. As we move beyond that, I think it's going to start to happen. Open compute and standardization. I was with a major supplier last week, and open compute has made them change their product plans. They are now going to build some products that actually follow some of the open compute designs. They were not going to before. So I think the really interesting thing that open compute has done is it's enabling innovation that probably would have been hard to achieve otherwise, because Facebook and the open compute group are enabling ideas like distributed UPSs, direct current, various other ideas like that, to open DCIM, open source DCIM, are enabling these ideas to gain traction that almost certainly would have struggled otherwise. This follows from open compute, and it follows from prefab modular. We're going to see considerably lower cost builds. So the trend from probably the mid-90s to a couple of years ago was that building new data centers was getting more expensive all the time. And we've seen that flatten off, and I think we're going to start to see it fall. And I would predict that probably in 2020, new data centers are going to be costing maybe 25% or more less than they are today. And that means, the newer data centers, as they come online, are going to be carrying less of the capital burden. So that's quite significant. Of course, as the data centers become cheaper, enables more of them to be built and more easily. So yeah, I think that's a very good trend. One question we get asked a lot is, will the cloud giants, coupled with the telco giants, the Verizons and the CenturyLinks and AT&T, Deutsche Telekom, British Telecom, between them, are they going to take the great proportion of the commercial data center market and indeed a lot of the enterprise workloads and leave not that much left for the rest of them? Are they going to take the growth? And actually, we've thought about that a lot, and we're thinking about that a lot, and I think the answer is no. Actually, big data centers need small ones, and the more that there is of these big data centers, the more that they need to put some of their services, some of their servers and some of their facilities down out into the network. So actually, I think we're going to start to see a more relationship where they need each other, the smaller and the larger data centers. Certainly, we expect to see a lot of activity on the edge of the network in terms of content distribution, in terms of bandwidth, etc. A lot of, if you look at all the population studies, people moving into the cities, and you need data centers to be where the people are, as well as at these remote locations. So, we expect to see both areas growing very, very strongly. Business goals drive operations. So if you're in the cloud world, everything now is being priced, in real time, server instances, megabytes per, by the dollar, etc. There's now talk about paying extra for availability, paying for proximity. So everything gets more accurately priced, more finely priced, and more dynamically priced. And yet, you've got this paradox that the data center operators and the IT people don't actually know what the cost of the data center is, and certainly not in real time. So, it's rather like having airlines price their tickets dynamically, but actually having no idea what the fuel costs or what the aircraft costs. So it doesn't make any sense. So we are now starting to see a lot of software tools emerging we're starting to see people talking about pricing and costing their data centers in real time so that they understand what things cost. Starting to see metrics not in technical terms but in dollar terms. And that is definitely a trend. And I think as we move towards the end of this decade, that will become more normal in future. Even in enterprise data centers, you're going to see more chargeback and pricing for service and so on. So many of you would have heard me speak a lot about DSIM before. It's one of my passions. Software tools are going to be essential to what I was just talking about. The optimized autonomic data center of the future will be a lot more efficient than today, which is often running, kind of blindly. We expect to see a lot more monitoring, a lot more modeling, a lot more control. I use the word software driven because software defined can be a little bit specialist, but we think software, rather like you wouldn't fly in a jumbo jet that didn't have software control, we think that the data center, the next generation data center, will absolutely be software driven. And even though I know there's a lot of resistance to DSIM in certain quarters and certain types of DSIM today, I still believe that that is the future, that is the way it's going to go. That is an example of some of the software tools that we see being deployed in next generation data centers. And notice that we have links from that software core out to the utility, out to energy data sources. You get energy pricing information, but also on the other side, out to virtual machine management, out to the ITIL systems, ITSM, and so on. So all connected by real-time management software tools. And my colleague, Rhonda Acerto, speaking on this tomorrow at 2, I believe. She's very expert in this area, and I'd encourage you to go to that. And then the other thing is, the cloud revolution, as Matt was saying earlier on, even though we talk about cloud all the time, and Amazon has certainly got a pretty significant cloud business already, it's actually barely begun. So, we think that a lot of the things that haven't begun to disrupt, that we talk about all the time, and especially cloud. Cloud is going to come up with new levels of service, new types of service, new pricing models. They are going to try to take more business away, definitely from the colos and the commercial. So that is going to definitely cause something of a strain. And also the level of IT innovation, especially with some of the things we're seeing in the labs like silicon photonics, which enables very high-speed optical interconnects between components, like memristors that enables very low-powered flash memory or flash-style memory, which could really significantly lower the cost of storage. These could be very significant. I don't know if some of you may recognize the pictures here, but the red machine is 1997, 800 kilowatt little data center or large data center. It's a Sandia National Labs computer, 1.8 megaflops in 1995, I believe it was. The little picture in the red box is a Sony PlayStation 3, which Sony also claims 1.8 megaflops for in 2005. Now, I realize that there'd probably be a debate about what is a megaflop in this situation, but what I think that demonstrates is how rapidly and how fundamentally the power can change, the progress in core IT can change what is possible. So, summing up these, you're getting industrialization, standardization, and automation. I think those would be 3 words that I would use. And I'm getting short of time, but I just want to run through types of data center that I think are going to be significant still, that will be being built in 2020. And some of it is just the same as today. And that's one of the things, even though it isn't perhaps dramatic to say it, it is at least reassuring to know things aren't necessarily going to change that much. So I won't dwell on the hyperscale and internet data centers, very large data centers, remote locations. These are the Googles, the Facebooks, etc. And they're going to be very significant for the near-term, medium-term, and long-term future. Without doubt, that is one dominant design data center model for the future. This we're starting to see emerge quite a lot now. People talking about a combination of microgrids, supercomputers, also carrying other mixed workloads, possibly located in campuses or in smart cities where there is a power infrastructure intelligently managed that enables quite significant and forward-looking investments. This is where we're more likely to see things like DC power, medium voltage power, fuel cells, renewable energy, all operating together. And some of these data centers, they've managed to get their, they've invested a lot in this type of technology that sounds quite futuristic, and they're getting pretty impressive results on their costs. So this isn't a kind of university experiment. This is actually viable going forward. And I think as we move towards smart city type environments, I think there's going to be a lot more encouragement of this type of model. For those building standard tier 3 data centers, absolutely these remain important because they're not competing with the Googles. They are built on proximity, they're built on connectivity, they're built on high availability, they're built on communities of traders together, and I see no prospect in the next 5 years that the demand for this kind of data center will weaken. It is a core part of the data center infrastructure. So that classic tier 3 type data center, still important. All of our data shows that there's not a lot of enterprise data centers being built. And that raises a question, is it all eventually, how much of it is going to go into commercial data centers? I have another theory that I can't back up with data right now, that actually we might see a bit of a reversal of that trend. As the networks are built out, they become more reliable, their connectivity improves, but critically, as the repeatable prefab modular data centers and the management of them becomes easier because it's going to be more predictable and there are going to be more services to support it, it will become more feasible for enterprises to maintain their own facilities. So 451 has long had a stance that we see some going to the cloud, some going to colos and multi-tenants, and some stay in enterprises. I absolutely agree with that. Micro-modular embedded data center. This is the one form that we think could be really quite different and new. And these are low-powered, self-contained, prefabricated data centers. And my colleague Daniel is going to talk about these tomorrow. But these can do very high performance, high density workloads. They have their own UPSs built in. They have their own cooling systems. They're very, very efficient. They may not need a big supporting infrastructure, but they can also go inside the white space. So we think that's an emerging form. We're starting to see a few suppliers emerge. I'm pretty sure that other suppliers are coming down the line on this. And this is a low-cost entry into the data center market. So if there's one new thing to come out of all of this, I think the micro-modular data center is going to be something we're talking about a lot more in a few years' time. And I'm aware that I'm out of time, so I think probably the delta between the most efficient data centers and the least efficient is going to widen. There is going to be quite a lot of fallout, but it's going to be fallout in the context of greater efficiency and more business for those that are successful. So I think it's really important that those data centers operators still in business invest to professionalize and compete, particularly important. And in 2020, the resilient, reliable infrastructure, I think, is still going to be absolutely key. When we go forward, and I don't see a lot of change beyond that immediately, But I do see that we are going to transition gradually to a lighter infrastructure as the IT becomes more sophisticated and more of the workloads will be moved around in more real time between data centers. And that's when we may start to see, perhaps towards 2029, mid-20s, we might start to see that cloud level resiliency kicking in. And finally, my final point is beware the black swan, because anybody who's ever attempted to look forward in IT 5, 10, 15 years has always got it wrong. There's new stuff comes up. So with that, thank you very much.
Thank you, Andy.